back, feel free to jump in and find a seat. There's plenty of seats. Thanks for coming. It's the first International Save the Frogs Day ever, and so it's a big day today. It's the start of something that we hope will continue every year from here on, and it'll be on this Tuesday, so I think it's the third Tuesday of April each year. It's slowly being taken up around the world, and so the governor of Virginia in the US has officially declared it International Save the Frogs Day for Virginia for here on, and a couple of other states in the US have also taken it up. I haven't worked out how to get Anna Bligh to do that, but I'll work on that over the next year, and maybe by next year I'll be able to say something like that as well. It's important though, I'll introduce myself I guess as well. So that's why we're here today, and this is happening all around the world, so you can think of yourself, it might be a small audience here, but there are many countries around the world that are presenting today for this occasion, and if you're interested you can see this group here, savethefrogs.com, because it's the only international non-government organisation, NGO, that's dedicated to frog conservation. So while other organisations are involved, things like Conservation International, they normally switch to whatever's more sexy at the time, so they might switch to tigers or elephants or rhinos or something like that. But as you'll see today, it's really frogs that need the conservation dollars and effort. Okay, so introduce myself. I'm Jean-Marc. As Matt said, I've been working on frogs for probably well over 30 years, and I wasn't really a dedicated frogger like Matt from childhood, although I did muck around with tadpoles a lot as a kid. It was only when I went to the Amazon, I started working on crocodilians, that I realised crocodiles are really boring and frogs are really interesting, because there were 50 species of frogs in the area where I was working, and only one species of crocodilian, and they're bloody hard to find in rainforests. So frogs became much more interesting, and so I ended up working on them there, and I came back to Australia with enough data to write a thesis, submitted a master's thesis, and the university said, that's too good, we'll give you a PhD for that, and I said, oh, okay. If you insist. And so of course I've been working on frogs ever since. So let's see how this works. Okay, so what I want to talk to you today about is not about me, but about frogs and the current plight of frogs. There are over 2,000 amphibian species that are threatened with extinction globally, and that's a huge number of species. Remember, humans are only one species. How many frogs do you think there are in the world? Any ideas? Anybody want to throw a guess at me?
6,000.
Unless you've heard this talk before.
6,000.
6,000, about 6,000. So 1/3 of frogs around the world are currently threatened with extinction. That means they're formally listed under the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, as either vulnerable, threatened, or extinct, or critically endangered. So a whole lot of classifications. Out of those 2,000, up to 200 are actually thought to possibly be extinct at this point in time, which is, as I said, a lot. We've got one species of Homo sapien, one species of Homo that's extinct. We're talking about 200 species of amphibians and far greater diversity, genetic diversity, than we see within our own species. The honour of having the first frog in the world to go extinct in recent times has come straight here to Queensland, southeast Queensland in fact. This species, the southern day frog, Turdactylus dionus, was found in the Mount Glorious region of Brisbane, just west of Brisbane, and it was the first frog in the world to go extinct in January 1979. Now that was before even I became a frogger, but not long before. And at the time, Australians sort of went, oh, well, frog disappeared. It was common in this stream, and all of a sudden we can't find it anymore. Everyone said, oh, they'll come back. She'll be right, mate. Good on your Aussies. Then, of course, the next frog to go extinct was this one, a far more spectacular frog biologically, perhaps, and far more unique genetically, because it comes from a very ancient lineage, and they have this very unusual form of reproduction. The gastric brooding frog, Rhebatrachus silus, was found around Maleny in the Blackall and Conondale ranges. It was known from a number of sites. It was discovered some time ago, but it was only sort of rediscovered in 1979 and then disappeared in 1981. It was the first frog in the world to be known to have this amazing form of reproduction, where the females presumably consumed the eggs, they developed inside her stomach, hatched from the eggs into little tadpoles, which swam around in her stomach, and she fed them just by excreting some sort of energetic juices, and then they eventually hopped out of her mouth as little frogs. And when that happened, the biologist who saw it, obviously fell off his chair. What an amazing thing. No other frog in the world was ever known to do it, and it disappeared. Damn, what are we going to do now? Well, another species of Rheobatrachus was discovered in 1984, 3 years later, in Youngler, and it was called the Northern Gastric Green Frog. Youngler is just near Mackay, a beautiful big national park. It disappeared within a year of being found. And so the second of the genus Rheobatrachus, this very ancient lineage of frogs, disappeared in 1985. So, incredible. So still, one of the most remarkable frogs in the world, there was still no publicity. It was still, oh, well, they'll come back. Australian biologists aren't good at finding them. Well, the story doesn't quite finish there. From then, we had a series of declines and extinctions throughout eastern Australia. And so the first ones, you'll see here on the left, the ones in red have completely disappeared and haven't been found in somewhere in the last 30 years. The ones that are in darker red, the armoured mist frog and the northern tinker frog, are on the edge of extinction. So there's a couple of populations, or actually in both of those cases, only one population is known of each of them, on one little patch of stream for the armoured mist frog and one mountaintop for the northern tinker frog, particularly vulnerable to climate change. A bunch of other species disappeared. So they disappeared from upland sites, but are still extant in lowland areas. And that's the Australian waterfall frog. And then it just keeps going on down the east coast of Australia. The ones in red, gone extinct. The ones in dark red, almost extinct. And the ones on the right here, dramatically declined from large areas of their original distributions. And so, of course, we now end up with 7 species now presumed extinct in eastern Australia. Now, extinction is something we don't take for granted, and under IUCN rules, we use 30 to 50 years as a rule. So you can't say a mammal's gone extinct until 50 years after the last one was seen. So we have to wait another maybe 20 years before we can officially confirm that these species are extinct. But believe me, I've spent the last 15 years searching for them, and they're not to be found, no matter how hard we try. But it wasn't until 1989, 10 years after the first frog disappeared in eastern Australia, that the global amphibians declines became an issue. And that was because of this frog, the golden toad. It was found in Costa Rica on a single mountaintop, but there were quite large populations and a whole lot of ponds. And it disappeared in 1989. Because it was so close to North America, and in particular the USA, it hit the big media spin. And all of a sudden, global amphibian declines. Even though Australia, we'd lost ours 10 years earlier. But we needed good old Americans to get us along the way, to at least recognising that this wasn't just a little blip in a population on the Gold Coast or in southeast Queensland, but a global phenomenon. So, global amphibian declines since then have been well documented throughout the world. So we've got rapid unexplained population declines worldwide. We've got globally 32% of that 6,092 species are currently listed under the IUCN listings, and 122 species have officially been listed as almost or completely gone. So things are not looking good for frogs. As far as vertebrates go, any other vertebrate like mammals or birds, extinction levels or that level of threat is less than 10%. So frogs are far more threatened than any of the mammals or the birds or reptiles on the planet. So in Australia specifically, we've got 50 species out of how many species in Australia?
6,000.
6,000 in the world.
230 or something.
220 something, somewhere in there. It's describing new species all the time. But we're around 220, so about 50 out of 220, about 25%, and 7 of those are extinctions. So the big trick with this was that really, I guess, bamboozled the scientists like myself throughout this last 30 years, has been that they disappeared